Talk more about the United as well as this prospect of a new European Premier League then, which would effectively replace the Champions League. Let's speak live to the sports lawyer Daniel Geey to analyse the obstacles that need to be overcome for this to become a reality then. Good afternoon to you, Daniel. Let's just start with United's latest financial results, as you heard there. Do you expect their losses to be replicated across the Premier League, and how can United guard against the future, do you feel?
Well, I think there's a few things to consider there. Obviously, the latest results are concerning generally for the Premier League. I think, as was sort of noted, Manchester United have spent a net large sum more generally. But I think obviously in these COVID times, specifically in relation to commercial revenues, match day revenues, and potentially larger costs incurred, it's certainly got to be a huge concern for the Premier League, and obviously for the Championship and lower leagues that obviously are needing amounts of money to plug particularly big holes right now.
Yeah, and the holes are big that you're talking about. What about this European Premier League then? Is this a power struggle between now FIFA and Uefa? Remind us about the differences in those organisations and who does hold the ultimate power, perhaps.
It's a great question, and probably one for a thesis in itself. But if we're talking about the initial situation, FIFA is the world's governing body. It organises the 4-yearly World Cup for men, women, and in other particular age categories. But traditionally, FIFA relates to and has distributed money out to national associations and helps run national team tournaments. Now, Uefa is a conglomeration of a number of European national associations and traditionally has run the very successful Champions League and Europa Leagues as amongst other competitions too. Now, what was possibly unseen until relatively recently was in previous attempts for European Super Leagues to come off the ground, it tended to be at least private organisations that had potential discussions with clubs to start effectively a private league. This situation is slightly different if the reports are to be deemed as true, is that it's actually FIFA that's having those conversations. And it would seem that if it's correct, FIFA is effectively trying to rebalance its position in the global and European market as a club tournament organiser rather than a national team tournament organiser.
So, that said, the competition is going to need approval from Uefa, which I guess very unlikely to happen. Their president, Alexander Seferin, has always been against a Super League. So is this a negotiating ploy, do you feel?
Well, a lot of people have actually said that a European Super League, in a way, came along a number of years ago with the formation of the Champions League. Remember that the old European Cup used to only be for the champions. That was obviously expanded rapidly to include, in a number of cases now, at least 4 positions in a number of the top 5 leagues. So as a result of that, the amount of games, the amount of money, the group phases and the knockout phases have, provided lucrative earnings for a number of the top European clubs. The query now is whether the current guise of the Champions League from 2024 onwards remains somewhat the same, differs to a degree, and the financial offering on the table for those clubs. It would seem, for example, that it might be more likely that more games might have to be played or might be required to be played, and the clubs might want that. It might well be that some type of guaranteed participation might be on the table as well. And I think the third and important bit is whether the usual domestic leagues, which are played over the weekends, whether those fixtures will be sacrosanct, or whether actually it might be the creeping reality that European games might be played over weekends and it not just being the Champions League final.
God, that would be fascinating if that happened. Look, FIFA were about to expand, as we all know, the World Club Cup before the pandemic. Do you think that's key to what's happening at the moment, do you feel?
Yeah, it's difficult to see things in isolation. You only need to look at Project Big Picture, where the potential for the number of clubs reducing in the Premier League, in terms of the number of fixtures reducing. It's obvious that at least at some point, FIFA was trying to expand its Club World Cup and take maybe more of a share of those revenues. So it wasn't just the World Cups that they received all of their monies from. So, it's lots of different power struggles going on nationally in terms of the Premier League, the EFL, the executives of both leagues, private banks that are looking to potentially finance any type of super leagues, and then obviously the discussions, or rather more terse discussions, that might be more going on at the moment between UEFA and FIFA, if they are going to get round to the table to try and discuss this in more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is the qualification for this permanent? How would that go down, do you feel?
Well, it's a really good question itself. I mean, one of the main elements or rather the main characteristics of the European leagues more generally is a pyramid structure, the risk of relegation, the sporting merit of promotion. And I think I know the ECA members had previously discussed the possibility of permanent membership in any type of particular formatted or reformatted Super League. The real question, I think, for a lot of people to answer is whether that would be appropriate, whether there would be permanent members, whether there would still be the possibility of qualifying for the Champions League or Europa League or whatever type of competition it is, because ultimately you want the public will want the teams that are playing the best, that are qualifying on a yearly basis, rather than particularly or potentially more traditionally larger teams that have bigger audiences that believe they should be participating because of their historic relevance.
Brilliant. Daniel, thank you so much for explaining so much of that.